This week we're looking at Africa. Now, the last time we left off in Africa, we were discussing imperialism in Africa. Now, if you remember, Africa has now been divided between all these European countries. And these European countries are completely exploiting Africa for their natural resources. Things like diamonds in South Africa, iron ore in different areas as well. Um, Gold in the Congo and the Gold Coast. These are all things that are sort of European is going in, taking over, and not really paying any attention to what people in Africa want. So here we're looking at the aftermath of Africa after World War II. Our objectives: identify factors affecting the success of African independence. Our second objective: describe the Ghanaian and the Kenyan independence. So we have two countries in Africa gaining their independence. Number 3, explain the civil wars in Congo and Angola. Now, Congo and Angola eventually gained their independence as well. So we're going to look at that as well. Achieving independence. So after World War II, we have a growing unrest in Africa. Now, many Africans actually fought in World War II alongside the Allied powers. And because World War II was sort of a fight for freedom, when many of these soldiers went back home, they were no longer really willing to be ruled by colonial powers. They believed that they deserved their freedom as well. This is the beginning of the Negritude movement. Now, the Negritude movement is after World War II, and it's a growing celebration of African culture. So up until this point, Europe has dominated Africa and has sort of dictated how Africa should be. Well, Africans are starting to say, we have a very rich culture, and we respect our culture and we celebrate it. From this, we start to see many African countries wanting to get their independence. There's also a shift after World War II. Not only with the question of freedom, many Africans believe they should have the right to be free, but European countries who had colonies in Africa were starting to question whether it was really worth it. It cost a lot of money to have colonies all over the world, and Europe is devastated after World War II. They don't have the money to sort of keep up these colonies. We see the same thing happening in Vietnam that we talked about earlier. So many of these colonies in Africa, they take many different paths to freedom. Some are very peaceful. For example, we're going to talk about Ghana. And some are actually quite violent. For example, Angola and Congo. So many African colonies, they end up becoming new nations after World War II. And many of these African nations, they end up having a huge struggle. Even though they are now independent, they're no longer ruled by the Europeans, their economy, they sort of have to figure things out on their own now. They've been dictated what to do for years, for centuries. And they now need to figure out their own economy, as well as any new government that's happening. The biggest problem that arises in Africa after most of Europe leaves their colonies is the fact that Europe had partitioned Africa. They had cut Africa the way that the European countries wanted to cut it. And what this means is there are thousands of different tribes living in one colony of Europe. And these tribes don't necessarily get along. So when Europe ends up leaving, many of these tribes sort of start to erupt out in violence, fighting each other to take control of these former colonies and now countries. This is still happening in Africa today. We still have many tribes fighting in these different countries. And the reason, again, is because Europe is the one who divided Africa. It was not divided how Africans would have divided it. One of the first countries in Africa we're going to talk about is the former Gold Coast. Gold Coast is located in this area of Africa, just so you have an idea. And this was a former British colony, and it gains its independence in 1957. And the leader of this sort of national group is Kwame Nkrumah. Now, Nkrumah, he is a non-violent leader. And much like Gandhi, who we talked about last week, he believed in getting rid of British rule by boycotting. And so often boycotting British goods in Africa, he was able to eventually take control. And Nkrumah, he ends up serving as Ghana's first president. So as soon as they take over, they rename the country Ghana. And he strives to sort of modernize the country. So he's trying to build factories, he's improving infrastructure such as roads and canals. He's also trying to improve education. Overall, he was a good leader. He wanted to do well by his country. But he did not think enough about Ghana's economy. So what eventually happens is all these new programs that he's starting about education, industrialization, and improving infrastructure in Ghana, they don't have the money for it. So when he is on a trip to China, he ends up getting kicked out of the government and the police take over. Since then, Ghana has not had a democratic rule. So since 1966 to 2000, that was only 14 years ago, we have a shift in Ghana going from military power to police power and civilian power, which means that up until 14 years ago, Ghana never even had their own elections. The next country we're going to jump to is Kenya. Kenya is located here in Africa, where the red is. Now, Kenya is also another former colony of Britain. And Britain, unlike Ghana, that was able to peacefully get rid of the British, Kenya, it's not as peaceful. So we have two reasons how Kenya is able to gain their independence. And the first is this man, Jomo Kenyatta. Jomo Kenyatta was the leader of the Kenyan independence movement. And he actually had very good intentions for Kenya. He also, even though this is Jomo Kenyatta. We also have the rise of a rebel group called the Mau Mau. This is a picture of the Mau Mau right here, as you can see. Now the Mau Mau, they're a secret society of Kenyans who used to own farmland that the British eventually took over. So these are Kenyans who are angry at the British for taking over their farmland. Now the Mau Mau, they end up using violence to sort of kick the British out. They use guerrilla warfare tactics, which means that they're sort of surprise attacking British farms and taking them over. Now, Jomo Kenyatta, he said he was not linked to the Mau Mau. But the British didn't really believe him, and they actually put Kenyatta in jail for over 10 years. In 1963, we have the British eventually letting go of Kenya, and Kenyatta ends up becoming the first president. Now, as you can see, Kenyatta, we know where Kenya gets their name. Kenyatta was generally a very good ruler. So his leadership was good for Kenya. But when Kenyatta dies, we have another guy taking over, Daniel Arap Moi. And Daniel Arap Moi is not a successful leader. He rules harshly, he rules corruptly. While Kenyatta was trying to join all the different ethnic groups in Kenya to be united, Moi does not do this. And he actually, it ends up leading to a lot of violence in Kenya. Now, Moi ends up ruling up until 2002. So that is only 12 years ago. And eventually Moi steps down. There is free elections in Kenya, although many people believe they were corrupt. In Algeria, we see violence as well. Here is Algeria, just so you guys get an idea where it is in Africa. Now, Algeria is a little bit of a different colony. First, it is a French colony. Secondly, Algeria is made up of Muslims, Arab Muslims, and Berbers. Berbers are sort of mountain men in Africa, originating from Morocco area and Sahara. Now the French, they are sort of going to fight Algeria. So Algeria wants independence, but the French is not going to give it to them. After World War II, the million French people who were living in Algeria, they did not want to share government power with the other Arabs and Muslims in the country. And eventually, we have the formation of the Algerian National Liberation Front, or the FLN for short. And they end up in fighting for their freedom, and eventually they are able to prevail. So they end up prevailing with sort of a big war with France. In 1962, we do have Algeria winning their independence after a sort of a long war with France. And their first president that they elect is Ahmed Ben Bella. He is the first leader in Algeria, and he was trying to make Algeria into a socialist state. So he was almost heading towards more of a communist way. Now, his army commander, who helped gain independence in 1962, did not like this and ends up overthrowing Ben Bella in 1965. So it's only 3 years, and Ben Bella is sort of ousted from the government. After Ben Bella is sort of ousted, we have a series of problems in Algeria. Basically, they're trying to industrialize and they're trying to sort of gain more for their economy. And there's a general dissatisfaction among the citizens. The other thing that starts to happen in Algeria is we see the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. Now, this is sort of Islamic radicals. We often link Islamic fundamentalists to the Taliban, who destroyed the 9/11 buildings in New York. Taliban would be an example of an Islamic fundamentalist group. So there's also an Islamic fundamentalist group in Algeria, and they actually win elections in 1991. The government does not secede from power. So basically, people are very divided about this Islamic fundamentalist group. And eventually, we have continuation of war in Algeria today. Now, there are at times ceasefire, but overall, we have off and on war. Next, we're looking at Congo. Here's Congo in Africa. It is actually the Republic of Congo today. Now, the Republic of Congo was a former colony of Belgium, and it was one of the worst treated colonies in all of history. Belgium basically went into the Congo, took every natural resource they could, and did not give any sort of social services to the people living in Congo. The other thing is Congo is made up of a lot of different ethnic groups. So not only is Belgium sort of ignoring this like cultural diversity in Congo, but as soon as Belgium grants Congo their independence, we have a lot of these ethnic groups sort of battling it out with each other. So in 1960, Congo ends up becoming independent. And we have an army leader, Mobutu Sese Seko. He ends up ruling from 1965 to 1997. Now, Mobutu was a dictatorship. He did not allow, it was a one-party ruled country, and there's no free elections. But in 1997, we start to see these rebels are coming up from different ethnic minorities, and they are able to overthrow Mobutu. And the one rebel group that does that is led by a man named Kabila. Now, Kabila and eventually was claiming to bring democracy to the Congo, but also ends up ruling with a dictatorship. And eventually he is overthrown again. And he's ends up being killed by different rebel groups. Now, Kabila's son, Joseph Kabila, he ends up taking over in 2002, we start to see some of these rebel groups calming down, and we're starting to see some peace in the Congo. Now, this isn't that long ago. That's only 12 years ago. In 2006, we have Kabila's son, the son of the rebel group, Kabila. He was elected, and he starts a new constitution and more democracy in the country. Angola was a colony from Portugal. And Portugal actually sends a lot of troops to Angola to sort of stop the rebellion, and they end up losing. So Portugal eventually gives Angola its independence in 1975. As soon as Portugal leaves, we have these two rival groups battling it out with each other. And one side is being funded by the Soviet Union, and one side is being funded by America. And it finally ends in 2002. So why have none of these African countries been very successful with independence? Please tell me.